Feminism has a long history and different roots in different bits of the world. But if we talk about the UK, the first mobilisation really was to get the vote for suffragettes who were from Manchester. Track forward through First and Second World War, where there were different mobilisations around women because a lot of men were off at war and suddenly we needed people to do the paid work. So things started to change, and then the next landmark would really be what was often called first stage feminism around the civil rights movement, where there was a push post-war that the world can be a better place, and there was movements around women's rights, gay rights, black rights across the world.
The research that we do at Manchester University is about finding ways to empower women in terms of politics, but also financially, so that they've got equal rights before the law, but also equal capacity to take up their rights and actually enact their rights.
There's been a lot of positive change if I think the conditions my grandmother grew up, the conditions and expectations my mum had. Lots of things have changed and improved, some have got worse.
What's becoming more apparent recently is how prevalent gender inequality and sexism is, even in the lives of young women. And so I think that those debates are becoming enlivened again.
We tend to go into different kinds of jobs, and by some weird coincidence, the kind of jobs most women do are paid less.
The gender pay gap has already widened, and we can expect to see it widen further.
It's not fair to say that everybody's on an equal playing field, that everybody's got equal access to work, because they don't.
The Women's Budget Group have gathered to watch the Chancellor deliver his budget speech, and then develop some ideas of our reactions to it and craft a press release.
The Women's Budget Group brings two issues together which are normally looked at separately, which is macroeconomics and gender issues. It brings them together to the core of the discussion.
We do this every budget, and when we do this, it's quite a good opportunity for us to draw together our expertise, to really think hard about what the direction is for gender equality in this country, and to try and come up with some solutions for how to make women's lives better.
We're able to see who will be the disadvantaged ones and who are vulnerable to certain decisions.
It's really interesting coming to a meeting like this, where you have people around the table talking about policy, about what feels to me like abstract economics a lot of the time, when really the work that I do is on a day-to-day basis, seeing people living through austerity. It's, like I said before, the lived experience, what it means to cope and to consume in times when things are being cut for most hard-working families.
Women are more prone to poverty than men at all stages of their lives because they earn less money. They have to use a lot of money to cover the cost of childcare or caring for elderly relatives, and this is becoming increasingly expensive for them because a lot of the public services that existed to support people with caring responsibilities have been cut. And what we also know is that if women don't have adequate incomes, it makes them vulnerable in a lot of other ways, so they might be less able to leave violent or abusive relationships.
The deficit is down by 1/3. Now in the coming year it will be down by 1/2.
The Chancellor will say there's a record number of jobs being created in the economy. Well, that might be the case, but actually when you break it down and see, well, who's getting these jobs? What the Women's Budget Group has found is that actually more of these jobs are going to men than they are to women.
Women are concentrated in low-paid jobs, 0 hours contracts, pay restraint in the public sector, where so many women are employed, the so-called flexible labour market that always seems to be flexibility that benefits the employers. The Chancellor said nothing about public services, just business as usual, more austerity for the public services, even though the economy is growing again. What he talked about was lots of tax giveaways. The people who will benefit most from those kind of measures are higher income men.
If we don't do meetings like this, I think the voice of many groups in society wouldn't get heard, because not everyone is represented in the relevant decision-making fora. So it's important that it's being discussed.
I'd really like to say that I'm positive about the future, but from the families that I've been working with in the project I'm doing now and the families that I've worked with over a couple of years before, I don't think that it really is a feeling of being positive, that actually people are fearful of their own future and the future for their children.
The Women's Budget Group, they do serve as an inspiration globally. And for me, the work became an inspiration to do something similar in Macedonia and to initiate it through my work and also independently as a person who is a gender advocate.
This research is really important because we're trying to achieve a closing of the gap, the gender equality gap between men and women. What I would like to see is men and women having equal incomes, but also like to see women having equal access to avenues of power. Equal representation is really important for gender equality and for the quality of democracy.
Our research looks at the pathways to politics of underrepresented groups. There are 503 male MPs and only 147 female MPs, and that's not like real life.
There must be fundamentally something wrong with the way in which we choose politicians that disadvantages women. With only 4 women, I think, in David Cameron's cabinet, how on earth is that going to represent the views of women of this country? Today I'm here at Manchester University talking to some of their students about why they should be more engaged in politics and why they should get other people to engage in politics.
It's fantastic for me being in events like this, participation into politics. A seminar with lots of young people, lots of really active women that are very confident and doing stuff.
I don't think that women do get a good deal in politics, but I think that it is slowly and steadily improving.
Having women in politics, I think sometimes that debate ends up being around tokenism, but no, it's actually about the impact that it has on policy and on how it affects the decisions that you make. And I think those decisions are much better and much stronger if you have diversity around the table than if you're just a kind of homogeneous group of well-off white blokes. You're just not going to produce policy that reflects the country you're trying to serve.
Women are still severely underrepresented, both in terms of MPs, in terms of cabinet ministers, and in terms of voters as well. And I think it is still pretty bleak in the UK.
The decision-making process is improved by diversity, and there is a lot of research that demonstrates that for business. If that is the case for business, it must also be the case for countries. But actually, it's not the business case that matters. What matters is the justice case. Women are 51% of the population and they do not govern themselves. And until that changes, then we can't say we have true democracy in this country.
Part of what we want to do in our research here at Manchester is to come up with the lessons for people in government and the parties into how they can bring more women into political life and make a difference therefore.
The entire political process was developed over a 2,000-year period for men, by men, and to address the problems that men had, and we have not redressed the balance yet.
It's an old boys club. It's about an elite club that you've got to fit in. So if you don't speak the right way, if you don't look the right way, if you didn't go to the right private schools or you don't have the right networks, then that's a problem.
The House of Commons is quite a brutal world. It's quite bullying. Speaking in Parliament can be quite challenging. And I think when you're a minority in that environment, it's harder.
We must have some order. Constant barracking and yaboo behaviour is a complete turn-off to the public. We don't want it, we don't need it. Leader of the House.
We still don't have equality in this country. We don't have equality of opportunity. There's still a gender pay gap, which is now, for the first time in 15 years, growing, not narrowing. We still have pretty poor maternal employment rates, and you still pay a huge career penalty in this country for having children.
I think quotas are unfortunately a necessary evil. If we don't do anything, we're not going to get anywhere.
The Labour Party's now got 34% of its MPs that are women. For the Tories it's only 16%, and for the Liberal Democrats I think it's 11 or 12. The way that we've been able to do that in the Labour Party is by bringing into play all-women shortlists, which are a very positive discrimination kind of tool, which a lot of people don't agree with, but they have been effective. And the one election in the last 20 years when we didn't have all-women shortlists, we saw a steep drop in the number of women MPs.
Just the idea of there being a lot more women involved in politics then the structure we see in the UK might become more gendered towards both sexes, and then as a product of that, women will have less barriers to entry.
During the Olympics, Paralympics and I am really positive about the future of women in British politics, not least because in Ed Miliband's shadow cabinet now, we nearly have 50% of that shadow cabinet that is women. You know, there are real changes coming through the system because people are saying it's wrong.
Getting more people into politics, getting more people into the House of Commons, making it more representative, making more women like me, working class BME, it's going to be tough. It's going to be a tough gig. It is a tough gig, let me tell you that. It's not for everybody. But what I've got to do is make sure that my position and my responsibility when I'm in the House of Commons means something to the local people in my constituency, but also for women, for working class people, and that I actually open up those doors. I do want to change the world. People fought against apartheid, people fought against the civil rights movements, people fought against the land right movement in Brazil. I'm in the 7th richest country in the world. If I can't get up and do something, then I might as well just go and lie in my grave now.
Underneath everything, the change will happen, and we will, in 100 years, be looking back at the sort of representation we have now and thinking it extremely odd.
Until we stop talking about this issue, because it's not an issue anymore, then we've still got some way to go.
Chile's first woman president, who was elected on a programme of improving gender equality, and we're looking at the challenges and the opportunities that she faced in trying to do this. She has appointed far more women to the cabinet, including at some points parity cabinets of 50-50 men and women. Certainly in her first administration, she did introduce a number of very much women-friendly reforms. She introduced some measures against domestic violence, increased numbers of shelters for women, but she also improved things like pensions and childcare.
I was here to take part in an ESRC-funded seminar series that's looking at the impact of austerity measures on work-life balance issues.
We're looking at work-life balance from the perspective of the employee, and we're also looking at work-life balance from the perspective of the employer, what an employer can do to get a better work-life balance for their employees, what employees can do to maximise their work-life balance.
In terms of work-life balance, whether this is going to improve for both men and women, I think as a society we have to reflect on how we organize our things, and that's why a seminar as today's is quite interesting to reflect on what are the different issues on the table.
It relates to gender in a number of ways. Traditionally, women have been the main users, if you like, of flexible working and work-life balance measures, and most of those have been around part-time and reduced hours work and around childcare and maternity. And increasingly what we're seeing is women hanging on to part-time work arrangements, and it used to be called the mummy track, so if you worked part-time you disappear off into a sort of career dead end.
When families have children, the women decrease their working hours on average with 4 hours, but they increase their unpaid working time by 24 hours. While for men, they also increase their unpaid working time, but only by 12 hours, so there is a really big gap.
The scope of pregnancy-related discrimination is huge in the UK. Statistics are suggesting that around 60,000 women a year are dismissed from their job because of pregnancy or maternity discrimination at work. Research has found is that there's a big litigation gap, and actually of those 60,000, it's estimated that only about 3% actually bring a claim to a tribunal, and that has implications for the individual not being able to actually get justice, and it also has implications for the economy because we're losing a huge talent resource.
Employers recognise that there's a pounds and pence benefit, and I think someone's put a cost to it about £4.62 per work-life balance initiative per hour.
Companies can make a difference, and worker-friendly flexibility kind of can have an impact on the motivation of workers, the engagement towards work. If they can combine their work with their private life, it usually has a positive effect in the long run, and it has to do with how governments create certain conditions and have legislation on parental leave and how parental leave is organized, how it's financed, whether it's financed at a particular percentage of your salary or whether it's flat rate, and this influences whether people are able to take it. The same thing has to do for childcare arrangements, and I think all governments in the European Union know that this is a very important element. However, the crisis has an impact on what choices they make. That's why we try to put these issues on the agenda to make sure they're very aware of cuts on these institutions would really have an impact on what happens for job sustainability and for people being able to
enter and stay on the labour market.
Work life is an issue for everybody and it impacts on everybody's life, and particularly with recent austerity measures following the recession, there's been a huge impact on the ability of people to have a good work-life balance.
Gender equality is not something that can be taken for granted. It's something that can go backwards as well as forwards. And so the research that we do, I think, helps to give some data and some facts to the importance of being vigilant about gender equality, campaigning for gender equality, and bringing feminism into academic work.
Things are tough. Some things have unravelled. That's why so many women are angry about sexist behaviour, about discrimination when they're pregnant. Things we thought we'd nailed, solved, and are starting to unravel again or become more visible again. But we have made progress, and as long as we continue to work collectively, we align with organisations who've seen the message and are making progressive moves that can be shared, we get the politics right. So we change a government if they're not looking after gender equality. We listen to examples in other countries. We can continue to move forward.